So I want you to take a moment to just think about the relationships you have in your life. And I want you to think about the things that you offer to people through your relationships. The things that you can't really put a price tag on, like your time, your energy, your support. And I want you to think about what you get in return when you give these things to people. So hold on to those thoughts. We'll come back to them at the end of the speech. But in the meantime, a little bit more about myself. I was born and raised in Rochester, New York. And I love my hometown. And one of my favorite things about Rochester is the fact that it's home to a huge population of deaf and hard of hearing people. Somewhere in the ballpark of 80 to 100,000 people. And two of those people happen to be my parents. So I grew up with deaf parents, which also meant I grew up in a bilingual household. I used American Sign Language to communicate with my parents and other members of the deaf community. And I would use English to communicate with everybody else in my life. So the relationship that I had with language when I was growing up was really influential to me. And as I got older, I realized that language was what I used not just to communicate, but to connect with people from different backgrounds and circumstances than my own. And I felt like that was something that I needed to share. And that brings us to our first of 4 points today, which is that we all have something valuable to offer. In my case, mine was language, but for anybody, this could be your talent, a personality trait that you have, or just some knowledge. Everybody has something that the people immediately around them could benefit from in some way. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I was invited to go volunteer at a summer camp for deaf kids in the Dominican Republic. And that was my first time leaving the United States, but more importantly, it was the first time that I was able to offer what I had to the people around me. And what made working at that camp so crazy was this. Because it was a camp for deaf kids in the Dominican Republic, every day we heard English, Spanish, American Sign Language, and even Dominican Sign Language, all being used simultaneously all day, every day. It was just like this melting pot of language. And what I learned in that kind of environment was that language was no longer just something that people used to communicate. It was more like a social currency. And I found that when I chose to exchange that social currency with other people, that's how I was able to establish common ground with a stranger, exchange ideas, and learn things that I never would have otherwise had the chance to know. And that brings us to our second point, which is that when you choose to share your talent, personality, knowledge, fill in the blank there, with the people around you, you make your world richer. And that happens because by sharing those things that you can't really put a price tag on, you lose absolutely nothing, but everybody around you gains at least something. So when I realized that fact and I saw language in that perspective, I came home absolutely determined to just learn Spanish. So for the next 3 years of my life, I just threw myself at the language. And I did this by taking college classes, reading Spanish books, listening to Spanish music, approaching people in Wegmans that really didn't want to talk to me when I heard them say a word in Spanish. I annoyed a lot of people throughout these years of my life. But what I was doing was I was just trying to learn a language in a place where it wasn't even being spoken. Has anyone ever here tried to do that? It's way harder than Rosetta Stone wants you to think it is. If you see an ad that says learn a language in 3 weeks, don't listen to it. It's impossible. So eventually I got tired of doing that, and I decided, okay, if I really want to get fluent in this language, I just need to go somewhere where they actually speak it and immerse myself in the culture. So I decided that I would spend 2 months in Oaxaca, Mexico, a state really far south, a really amazing place, and I stayed in this really small town, dirt road town, rural, of about 500 people. Like, this town was so small that I would roll out of bed in the morning and be on the other side of town. Where was I going? But that was like the best decision I ever made. You know, and I went there to learn Spanish, but the lessons that I learned about their culture and their way of life are the lessons that I'm absolutely never going to forget. And I met 2 people that summer that really embody those lessons that I was taught, and I want to introduce those people to you today. The first person is a 10-year-old kid named Abdiel. Abdiel lived right next door to my host family, so on the other side of town. And he became like my little brother that summer. You know, he would show me all his favorite places around town. We would eat tacos every day after school, and you know, he never passed up on any opportunity to remind me he's much better at soccer than I am. He never stepped on a basketball court with me, though. So, but as my Spanish got better that summer, Our conversations evolved from talking about our favorite foods to more lofty ideas such as our life goals and our experiences. And despite just being a 10-year-old kid, he was really intelligent and always really honest with me. And one of the key takeaways I took from our conversations was that for him, growing up in a small town in southern Mexico that saw a lot of American exchange students come every year, stay for 2-3 months at a time, and then leave, he'd become accustomed to people playing a part in his life for a very short amount of time and then leaving as if they never really had a true connection. So when I heard that, it made me change how I approached my time there that summer. I was no longer there to just learn and then leave, and forget that. I was there to invest in people's lives at that point. And that brings us to our third point, which is that if we want to be intentional with how we connect with the people around us, we need to at least be aware of what they need so we can act accordingly. The second person I want you to meet was one of my Spanish teachers, a man named Adan. Adan is one of the most intelligent and hardworking people I've ever met in my life. And when I met him, he was working on this project that really inspired me, and I think you'll all be really impressed by it too. He had taught himself how to code on his computer at home, and he was working on developing a software that would teach lessons in the STEM subjects in indigenous Mexican languages that, as of right now, don't have access to that information in their language yet. Super cool idea, and I was instantly just hooked on it. And as I got to know Adan and his project better that summer, I got to know some of the challenges that were in his way of achieving this goal. And his two big challenges were, one, having a lack of funding, and two, not having the proper equipment to do that kind of work. And it's a big project, and he was just right at the beginning. He had a long way to go. But he kept going, which really inspired me. So when it came time for me to, when it came time for me to leave at the end of the summer, I knew that I couldn't just, not keep in touch with them. I didn't want to just be the guy that leaves and texts them once a year on their birthdays and then doesn't talk to them again for another year. So the three of us kept in touch while Don and I really, for about a year, brainstormed for different ways that, my life and my work here in New York could affect his life and his work in Mexico and vice versa. We wanted to create this kind of reciprocal relationship. And in that year, I transferred to SUNYGeneseo, and I'm not a business major, but I joined the business fraternity on campus, and I started studying business on my own outside of school. And I became really fascinated with these businesses and these companies that exist for reasons other than just making a profit. I love those ideas. I'm talking about companies like Tom's Shoes, which has a 1-for-1 program where they donate a pair of shoes every time, or to someone in need every time they sell a pair. And companies like 4Ocean, which creates bracelets and other products out of plastics recycled from our oceans and our beaches. And what really drew me to these kinds of ideas was the fact that they create connections between their consumers and their individuals with greater causes and communities that would never otherwise be connected. And I thought, how cool would that be if I could create a connection between my community here at SUNYGeneseo and the community there where Don and Abdiel live. And so one of the greatest qualities about Geneseo that I learned was our campus Greek life. And I say that because we have so many organizations, fraternities, and sororities on campus that actually care about community service and creating a change in the world. So for me, that was the perfect place to start. So I started my business about a year ago called Madeira Greek Paddles, and I just started making paddles for my own fraternity. Started really small. And if you have no idea what a Greek paddle is, pretty much organizations, fraternities, and sororities buy these, decorate them, then present them to new incoming members or departing seniors. And they really represent a lot about an organization's tradition and history. And part of the history of the Greek paddle is a negative history. It's been historically associated with hazing and paddling. And I thought, how cool would it be if we could take this product that has a negative history and use it to do something good in the world? And we were able to accomplish that by working out that if we took a quarter of our profit from every paddle we sell and just use that to get Adon a little bit closer to his goal, we could do some good. So our first semester in business went a little like this. I was naive, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I said, okay, I'm just gonna start low. I'm gonna sell 100 paddles. It'll be really easy. People are gonna love this idea. and I sold 18 paddles. Don't ask me how it happened. And 11 of them were to my own fraternity. So I really only sold 7 paddles. But, it was a really frustrating 3 months of my life, and I lost so many hours of sleep, and there was a million times where I was just tempted to drop the whole idea and move on with my life like a normal person. But while I missed my goal by so much, that semester was not a failure by any means, and I'll tell you why. With those 18 paddles that we sold, we took in a profit of $400. So at least we took in a profit, Other companies start by going into debt. So that was a relief for me. So we took $100 out of that $400, which I will let you in on a secret, $100 is really not a lot of money these days. I would have been the man in like 1800. But with that $100, we were able to buy some sound equipment, a microphone, and some wiring for Don that he'd needed for a long time because the materials that he was using, the equipment that he was using up to that point, weren't really doing well for him, and he needed this to record better lessons that he could provide for free online. So I want to show you an example of what he was able to do before and what he's able to do now thanks to those 18 Greek paddles, and focus on the sound quality in each one.
Hola, vamos a ver el famoso programa de ensamblador.
So you'll probably notice the sound was really gritty, there was a lot of back noise, and here's the stuff that he's able to do now.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Los saluda Adán Soriano Franco. Es un placer traerles el tema de sistemas de archivos.
So you probably didn't understand what he was saying. I didn't really either. But what's really fascinating to me and what's really encouraging is that through these 18 Greek paddles, which is such a simple thing, it's almost crazy that it could have even happened. Through 18 Greek paddles that we sold in Geneseo, New York, we were able to significantly improve how a man does his work from thousands of miles away. That brings us to our fourth and final point, which is that the most minor actions can create the most major changes. And just because the action that you take in pursuit of a goal is really small, even microscopic, that doesn't make that action insignificant. And I'm really encouraged because this semester we've done way more than 18 paddles already, and we're just getting started. And right now, Don and I are working together not just to improve the quality of their STEM education in the area, but to provide kids like Abdiel in his area tools and the resources to become productive leaders in their society. So I want to return back to what I said at the very beginning of the speech, about thinking about your relationships and the things that you give to people, the things that are priceless. And now I want you to leave thinking, what do I have in my skill set that I can offer? What do people around me need? And where do those two things intersect? And what minor action could I take today that could create a major change tomorrow? That's all I got for you. Thank you so much.